Welcome to Hyperspace Prospector. I will be discussing Phasma by Delilah Dawson. Some of you may remember I read BSO first. Technically, it's supposed to be this one, then that one. I read it this one, then that one. These are some of my running thoughts as I was reading. I try to keep any major plot points out of the review, but I will be talking about the plot. So if you haven't read it, heads up. I found the opening a little bit slow, I'll be honest. It was not until I was about halfway through that it really picked up, but wow, did it pick up. I unfortunately could not stop reading. I read the last half of the book in one day. I also now understand why V was so upset that the First Order confiscated her knitting, because it wasn't just that she was knitting something for her brother that she had been working on for a while. Apparently the yarn itself was very rare and kind of illegal black market yarn. You've earned a little bit more of my respect. Part of the reason I had some trouble getting into it at first is this book is in current tense, and I'm pretty sure BSO is past tense. She glanced around at, yep, past tense, but the man in red is silent. The gun always rammed into some soft place on her body. As much as I like V as a character and find Captain Cardinal interesting, the present tense of those chapters really just did not work for me. It was when we really got deep into Phasma's backstory that the book captured my attention. I did enjoy some of the details about V, though, because BSO, she was very much out in the open about being who she was and part of the resistance. Here we got to see her in full spy mode. She had contact lenses on to change her eye color. She was talking about how she used to have longer hair, the way she airlocked her jacket to put on something that looked more like a civilian smuggler. Even the way she experiences the world and is paying attention to every little tiny detail, people's micro expressions, and then changing her demeanor based on that was fascinating. The heart of this book that makes it absolutely incredible, and I can't wait to reread it, is Phasma's flashback backstory. This is just my take. I love V, I do, but I think this book would have been better without her. Phasma should have been Phasma. Just tell her backstory. Don't worry about having it be flashbacks. The main reason for this for me is it's in a genre I absolutely adore. I don't know the name of it. I'm not one of those people that keeps track of all the genre labels. But if you've read or seen the Shannara Chronicles,
the world outside is dangerous, Will. It's full of gnomes and trolls and rovers.
Only an idiot would travel these woods alone.
or the 100,
It's been 97 years since a nuclear apocalypse killed everyone on Earth.
You are one crew, or you are the enemy of one crew. Choose.
that's the genre. Post-apocalyptic world where you had a fairly advanced civilization, then there was a big nuclear accident or war or something that basically destroyed most of the planet. And you end up with little roving bands of kind of medieval level society that are just struggling to survive, to find water, food, basic supplies. They end up with very specific cultures, and they're living in this world of burned out, what's to them ancient civilizations, what's to us current what we live in. Like Shannara Chronicles, on the show, they fall into an old high school and they're stumbling around these passageways wondering what everything's for. In the books, there's a terrifying sequence where this old bunker is still active and the laser defense grid is attacking them and they don't know what it is. They're like, what is this magic that's going on? They don't know what a computer is, but they still exist. It's a whole thing. The 100, we have the grounders with their like Mad Max style weapons, and yet we also have the people in the bunkers that are like mad scientists. I love it. And Phasma in Parnassus is this fantasy, nuclear, post-apocalyptic genre. So we have all these really interesting tribes of people. And we're starting with, I think it's pronounced the Skyer. Having only read the book, I'm not sure exactly how to say it. Common book reader problem. So I'm just going to say the Skyer. This was hilarious to read at first because they're out by the sea in this cavern and they have these great like war masks and this culture of you better pull your weight. And in the opening sequence, their elderly leader is murdered because he's too slow. He's clearly not fit to lead anymore. He's graying. And I heard all this and I was like, okay, well, I mean, I guess that is disturbing, but makes a lot of sense if you have someone in their 90s or something in a society like this where you're basically fighting for your very existence. It could be awkward to be led by someone like that. And then we get the reveal. How old is this elderly graying leader? He's in his 40s. In other words, my age. I'm like, they don't often live past 35. So I would be an elder. And I'm like, graying? I mean, I have a few gray hairs. If it hits the light just right, you can see them. I call them my tinsel. But like, I wouldn't say I'm elderly. So this is the first hint that Phasma is growing up in a culture that's a bit brutal, even for post-apocalyptic settings. Right from the beginning, though, she's using all kinds of weapons, spears, axes, blades, basically anything she picks up, just naturally formidable. We also find out that Phasma had a brother. And at first, the two of them seem very different. But I'm not going to spoil anything. By the end, you realize, no, they're not. The reveal at the very end about her brother was probably the most disturbing thing in the whole book. And this is a book with beetles that erupt out of the sand and eat you alive. Oh, I should probably mention, do not let kids read this. This is very violent. It's not for kids. I would say PG-13. Phasma's backstory, to me, is a brilliant opportunity for Disney Plus to make a gritty, hardcore Star Wars TV show for adults. Andor is a great example of showing an adult drama show. They did that brilliantly. It's a masterpiece. But Phasma's backstory, that would be like HBO level wild violence, sex. Yeah, they're going to have to put a huge disclaimer at the front. Don't let kids watch this, but I would be here for that. When we first meet Keldo, he is described as his strength, confidence, and dignity radiated. Civ had long known that he would make a great leader. A lot of this book is from Civ's perspective, and she is a great character. She's in charge of making the Oracle salve, which is they work with the remains and they stick these machines into them that take out, I guess, key nutrients. And then she works with herbs and she creates this salve that they all wear under their eyes or that they might put on a wound that helps with the basically radiation and fallout from the nuclear disaster that happened. There are some elements of Dune, I would say, to this. When you pass away, you still work to help the community. They take your water. They take your nutrients. They do so in a respectful way. But in situations like this, even a dead body needs to be used. Some of the other tribes are a little bit less respectful. There is a moment where one of the characters is killed and then eaten. Yeah, full Donner Party. As I said, not safe for kids. I like the conversations that Phasma has with her brother. I guess you could call them arguments, actually. Peace brings prosperity. That's what Keldo keeps saying. Let's forge alliances with our neighbors. Stop throwing raids on each other. It makes no sense. There's so few of us. Phasma believes conquest brings safety. Peace is a betrayal. Her idea of keeping her people safe is, well, she has very interesting ideas on that. Let's put it that way. You got to read this book. We keep jumping back and forth between this story, which I found riveting, and then just kind of Captain Cardinal doing his thing, which I found a little bit jarring. That being said, it really gives a lot of depth to what Finn went through. Based on the timing, I think he knew Captain Cardinal and was trained by him. Because what kind of went on is the First Order would go to these backwater planets, find starving orphans, and take them in, give them food, clothing, a place to sleep, somewhere safe to live. And then every single night, they would be bombarded with propaganda, whispered into their ear. The First Order brings security. The First Order keeps you safe. That kind of thing. All night long. I think they even put stuff in their food as well to make them compliant. And Captain Cardinal was coming in as a father figure to mold these young people, and they found the younger they are, the easier it is to do this. He'd bring these starving, desperate orphans and bring them comfort and attention that they've never had before. And so these young, impressionable kids are brainwashed, basically, and then when they're teenagers, they get handed off to Captain Phasma, and they've been carefully, again, as their kids, been taught that she's the ideal. She's what you aspire to. There are posters of her on their dorm walls in her cape. Most of them will do whatever she says. But as we see here in this book, unlike Captain Cardinal, who's in the First Order because he wants to help people, she's there for power, for her own survival that she's been taught from her young age, kill or be killed. And she takes these teenagers and turns them into murderers. From what I can tell, Finn's story is that he had just come out of the younger training program. He had probably had a couple of years under Captain Phasma, and then the situation we saw him in at the beginning of the film. This is his first time in an actual combat situation, being ordered to hurt civilians. And he couldn't. In spite of years of indoctrination, having it whispered in his ear every night, he was still a good person. Captain Cardinal couldn't get it out of him. Captain Phasma couldn't get it out of him. In that moment where he sees his fellow trooper down on the ground and he looks around, he's like, what am I doing here? I just want to get out. Is that much more powerful, knowing everything I learned from this. I feel like my appreciation for Finn's character just blossomed with all the other extra chapters. I kind of wish they had done a book of Cardinal and Finn. That I would really be interested in. The First Order also kind of has a few good points, unfortunately. That's what your New Republic does. Ignores poor backwater planets and funnels money to the rich planets that can afford to have a voice in the Senate. Who spoke for Jakku? No one. Who spoke for the boy I was? No one. The Republic and the New Republic that we have seen so far is corrupt. They don't care about these kids who are orphaned on these poor planets. Just look at Anakin and where Qui-Gon found him. Everyone's all horrified, and Shmi is just like, the Republic doesn't exist out here. Nobody cares about us. The New Order cares, but they only care about resources, so they'll strip the planet of their kids and their minerals, and off they go on their way. But at least they notice that these planets exist. There are no rich kids here, lording it over orphans. No one is starving or thirsty or dying of exposure. This is partly why I'm interested in the new Rey movie, because the New Republic failed. It had some great people working in it, like Mon Mothma, but ultimately, it didn't work. We've seen that in Ahsoka. We saw that in the sequels. They're going to have to come up with something new. I don't know what, but something. Hopefully in time for poor Kix when he wakes up. There is some humor in this book. It's not all terrifying and gruesome. Phasma's people live by the ocean, and they come across a dune sea for the first time, so we're really heading into Dune here. This is their reaction. "I've never walked on sand," Torben noted. "What's it like?" "It shifts under your feet. It's coarse and rough and irritating. It gets everywhere." I had to stop reading because I was laughing so hard when I first came across that. I was like, really? Okay, I'll grant you that one. We keep running into the Constar Mining Corporation kind of bunker stations. I guess they're like Blue Sun and Firefly, but to the Star Wars universe. They're the ones responsible for basically blowing up half the planet and then abandoning it. And apparently, they're doing just fine out in the galaxy. They cut their profit losses, all the survivors to fend for themselves as best they could, and didn't care. And that's something the Star Wars sequels have done pretty well, is just show corporate greed. That beyond the squabbles between the Empire, the First Order, the Resistance, the Rebellion, is this like ever-fixed rock that's just the corporations who actually run everything. And they rather like selling weapons. To both sides. They don't care.
There's only one business in the galaxy that'll get you this rich.
War.
We saw that here. We saw that in Last Jedi. We even saw it to a certain degree in the Jedi Survivor novel. The corporations run the galaxy. And they don't care about people. But it did make for some really chilling moments as we meandered between all these very different bunkers, I guess you could call them. Like in one, they found these killer droids. There was a room heaped with bodies and smelling and forcing them to work. And oh, that was terrifying. And then they get to the next bunker and it's like an arena of gladiator fighting. Let me just say, don't get attached to any characters in this because they will die. There was an interesting theme of touch in this as well. Phasma is like me, she doesn't like to be touched, and the other characters recognize that. So even if she's been injured and might actually need some help, they don't grab her arm or anything. They'll walk up and say, "Phasma, do you need any help?" But they never just like take hold of her. I really appreciate that. Because meanwhile, we have Civ, who's all about touch. She'll just like lean on people and put her arm around. She loves being touched and feeling other people next to her. Both of these are seen as legitimate, and these two characters respect each other. I really liked her observation that coming from a group of very few people into the arena where there were tons of packed bodies and, well, some really awful things going on. It must have been easy to be petty and cruel when you had an excess of people. In the Skyer, lives were few and hard to create, and so people tried to keep each other alive and were kinder. She's not wrong. There's so many people all vying for resources and jobs and things these days that it's really easy to become petty and cruel because there's 10,000 people to replace that person. So who cares if you're mean? Civ is right here. Just look at the internet comments. I have to delete on my main channel, which is the one with way more subscribers, 80% of comments. 80%. Because they're so nasty and cruel. Here's a fun tidbit though. Probably one of my favorite parts of this book. Finding out where Phasma's armor came from. I'm a huge fan of Naboo. I consider it my homeworld. There's a reason why I'm team Santeca. If I could have a ship, it would be Probably the one that Padme has in episode 2. That gorgeous, sleek, chrome ship. It's just the right size for a huge wardrobe and a couple of people and a droid. That would be my choice. And apparently, Emperor Palpatine agrees with me because it was his favorite yacht. That style of ship. And it's the one that General Hux had in this episode that he crashed onto Parnassus. Where is this going? Phasma's origin story is this brilliant adventure, terrifying journey to find this ship. The one that reforges her from a local warlord, basically, into the Phasma we see in the movies. She goes back to the planet for, among other reasons, to get chrome plating off that very ship. Take it to one of these infamous Constar station bunkers where they have the ability to duplicate kind of a 3D printer. And she redoes her armor with that very chrome plating. So the one you see her walking around in is a former Naboo Star Cruiser yacht from her home planet. And there's another even bigger reason why that's so horrifying that I won't spoil for you. But I loved that scene. Now, whenever I look at her in that armor, I'm going to be like, that armor's from Naboo, kind of. Returning to V, she tells all of these stories, partly to keep herself alive and to stall for time, but also, by the end, she kind of realizes Captain Cardinal's not a bad guy. He's just been taught since he was a kid that the First Order is good. And she's like, I can flip him. And she starts worrying for his safety. And she says that the point of the last few stories was no one will go as far as she will to survive. Don't go against her. What I was expecting from this was just a whole bunch of detail that would explain this. Instead, I think they summarized this book, at least the V sections, pretty easily in BSO. You don't have to have read this. In fact, I think this works very well as a standalone. But so does this. Because ultimately, it's about Phasma, as the title suggests. I'm kind of in love with her now. She's awful. I mean, I'm not saying she's a good person in any way. But as a character, she is an absolute queen. I love everything about her. There's this scene in the arena where I was just like, stop being so awesome, Phasma. I'm already in love with you. I think the story was meant to make us just completely scared whenever she walks on screen now. My takeaway was mostly just drooling over her. Yeah.
So good to have you back.
I'm going to have to do a Last Jedi commentary, I feel like, after reading this book. It felt very different than most of the other Star Wars novels. As I said, this is more Shannara Chronicles than Star Wars. And I really want them to make a show or a film. They made Furiosa. Can we get Phasma?